Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Long Game. This is David Lee Kim, your host and co founder of Omniscient Digital. In this episode, we hear from Thomas Smale. Thomas is the founder and CEO of FE International, the industry leader in M&A advising. He's an entrepreneur and an expert in mergers and acquisitions with experience dating back to the early 2000s buying and selling websites. His company has supported over 1,200 successful exits to date. In this conversation, we talk about how Thomas built FE International by focusing on maintaining a good reputation, and that in turn drives word of mouth with his clients. He shares the challenges that come with building the business and how the industry has matured from simple marketplaces to white glove services. Thomas also shares advice on how business owners should build their businesses if they plan to sell, which actually turns out to be great business advice in general, regardless of whether you want to sell. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Thomas Smale. All right, Thomas, it is so great to have you here on The Long Game. Thanks so much for making the time.
Yeah, thanks, David. Appreciate you inviting me on.
Great. So let's jump straight into it. Let's start with what you're currently working on. So you are the founder of FE International, global M&A advisor for SaaS, e-commerce, and content businesses. I've actually been paying a lot of attention to this space because this whole industry of micro PE has kind of been getting a lot more popular. And FE International just keeps coming up everywhere I look. Whereas before it might have been Flippa or Biz by Sell. What would you say are the things that you did or your CEO did that led to the company being recognized as this global M&A advisor?
Yeah, so I think, well, firstly, I appreciate the kind words. Secondly, I think one thing we've done since day one, so I founded the company in 2010. I have a business partner as well. I became CEO a couple of years ago. But in all of that time, we've always focused on building a good reputation. We spent all of our time making sure that we never, at least not intentionally, never overpromise things that we can't deliver on. The nature of M&A as well is most advisory firms like us primarily get paid on success. So there's almost never a scenario where someone is paying you and they don't feel like they've got good value because they've only paid you on success. It's not like if you run an agency, like a web design agency, you could pay them $100,000 to design your new website. And you can hate the new website, but they don't really care because they've still got their $100,000. That's not how we work.
Completely messes up all your rankings and traffic, and they still get paid.
Exactly. So reputationally, we've always put effort into making sure we're building a good reputation. We've done over 1,200 deals. And what you tend to find is that founders and entrepreneurs, when they sell a business, will talk about it, but they won't necessarily talk about it publicly. They probably talk about it in private. So I've always thought there's a compounding effect of word of mouth over time. Like if you sell your business and you tell 5 friends, and then someone asks one of those 5 friends, where could I sell my business? They might say, oh, David mentioned this company. Who are they again? And maybe you might have mentioned like 2 companies to them. So then those 5 people then recommend 3 new people, and it kind of compounds from there. The challenge, so you mentioned 2 marketplaces, so Flipper and Biz by Sell. They are fundamentally marketplaces. Marketplaces have a significantly lower success rate of selling your business than we do. And because they're just a marketplace, I think it's much less likely they're going to get credit for a sale, because if someone sells their business on Biz by Sell or Flipper, they've done 99% of the work themselves. Whereas if you hire us, not that we've necessarily done 99% ourselves, but we do the vast majority for you. We keep it hands off. So if there's a successful sale, then the seller's going to be happy and give us a lot of the credit for that. So over time, that compounds. Like both Flipper and Biz by Sell have been around longer than us. I think over time, that reputational compounding is quite powerful.
Yeah. And it sounds like if someone were to work, this was one of my questions I was going to ask earlier, but let's just get to it. I was going to ask what the difference is between you and Flippa and Biz by Sell. It sounds like you essentially provide that full service. Whereas if you had to go through Flippa and you had to find your own broker and your own lawyer and everything to do the deal, it sounds like what FE International does is provide a lot of that resource in order to get the deal over, or
well, yeah. So essentially, if you want to sell your business, you have multiple options. One is you do it yourself. Two is you do it yourself with the help of a marketplace. Three is probably something in the middle, like you hire someone to help you for bits of it, but not all of it. What we do is we're what I describe as a full service M&A or mergers and acquisitions firm. We do everything in the process from initial valuation through to physically closing the deal and making sure you get paid. Throughout that, like we have an in-house legal team, in-house accounting team. So we do a lot of the heavy lifting that otherwise you would have to do yourself. So that doesn't mean you never have to bring in a third-party attorney to maybe like review the purchase agreement that our team have prepared, or doesn't mean you don't need an accountant to give you like tax advice, but we're doing almost all of the heavy lifting in terms of hours. So if you are using an attorney, maybe you're paying them for 5 hours, not 500 hours of kind of ongoing work. So you're very much kind of outsourcing the entire process to us. And people tend to work with us if they want certainty and they like our process. Where people do not work with us is if they want to kind of make up their own process, and they want to make all of the decisions themselves and they think they know what they're doing and they have access to like a wide range of buyers. But the reality is almost no business owner, they might be able to do the first elements. They might be able to negotiate for themselves. They might be able to run their own process, but almost no one out there will have the same reach that an M&A firm can get you. I think it's very similar to if you're selling real estate in the US. Yes, you can theoretically do it yourself. Yes, you can find probably hundreds of buyers out there who will make an offer on your property without the need for a realtor. But there's a reason why the realtor industry exists, and that's because in general, they're going to get you a better deal and make sure you don't get screwed over. It's exactly the same with selling a business. So if you looked at kind of, I guess, a Venn diagram of I'm selling my business, where can I go? We do technically overlap or compete with Flipper and Biz by Sell, but the reality is we're essentially two completely different options. I guess it's like two countries being competition for vacations. Like technically, yes, but they're if one is like a mountain biking vacation and the other one is a beach vacation, are they really competing?
Right. That's fair. And so now that you've developed this great reputation, seems like you're getting referrals from each client you work with, and you're this recognized global brand now. What are you focused on for the business? What are the growth levers you're looking at? What are the challenges you're facing?
So for us, the business at this stage, I guess there's like multiple things we're thinking about. One is how can we consistently improve our service? And the nature of working with so many founders from very diverse groups, whether that's business model or like location, they're referring people with different businesses to us all the time. So sometimes it might be a bigger business than we've ever worked on before, and that might come with some new challenges that requires different skills internally or a slightly different process, or that might be a slightly different business model or a slightly different sub-industry. So maybe we know a lot about e-commerce and we're very familiar with the Shopify platform, but maybe someone comes along with an e-commerce business on, say, BigCommerce, which is also a popular, well-known platform, but we have to learn a little bit about it. Maybe there are some nuances of that platform that Shopify doesn't have. So obviously that's just a random arbitrary example, but there's always things like that. The nature of online business or technology businesses that we deal with, they are always changing. Like the businesses we're selling today versus 5 years ago are different. People are using different platforms, different tools, different technology, all sorts of different things. We have to constantly be evolving. We can't just do the same thing and expect to get the same results. We always have to constantly be learning new things. So I guess firstly, we have to keep improving our service just to kind of stay top of mind, top of the market, and make sure we can kind of serve everyone that comes to us. Secondly, we like constantly have to make improvements to process just to make things more efficient. So in my mind, the perfect M&A firm would have 100% success rate of deals it takes on to close. While ours is well over 90%, there's still in my mind some efficiencies to be found there. So every time a deal doesn't sell or does sell, we'll do a post-mortem analysis of like what happened, what went wrong. Was it a valuation issue? Was it a client issue? Was it a distribution? Like there's all sorts of things that could go wrong for a deal not to happen. But we're constantly kind of self-analyzing and assessing like what happened and what we can improve for future. Because obviously a successful deal is you get the compounding effect of word of mouth, but you probably also get the same thing if you don't successfully sell a business.
Right.
Although, like I said at the start, we do only get paid on success. So there's never a scenario where someone feels like they've been ripped off because we're not charging them anything. But it's still in the pursuit of, I guess, excellence. We always want to make sure we're doing a good job and continuously improving that. And then the other element of growth we look at is primarily the business to date has been sell side M&A. So we sell your business, you pay us a fee. There are many other things that we get asked for by buyers and sellers, of which we have almost all of those skills and people internally. So we're currently working on like thinking of like new things we can roll out to offer clients we already have. But like I said, as deals get like bigger, more complex, businesses get different. Sometimes those people are going to want a slightly different service to our more standardized sell side M&A service, which works really well on businesses in the 1 to 100 million valuation range. But if someone comes to us with, say, a $250 million valuation business, they might want something slightly different. So we could offer it. We just need to figure out what that is.
Yeah.
There's never a day where we're not we've run out of ideas to grow. There's kind of like constantly things to do. The challenge is more what should be prioritized.
Yeah, you're not at a point. I don't think you'll ever get to this point, but you're not just sitting there, deals going through like an assembly line smoothly or anything like that.
Exactly.
At least not yet. Yeah. So what's the most common reason, or maybe 2 or 3 reasons that deals don't go through?
So almost 100% of the time, it's not us, fortunately. It's almost always the buyer or seller changing their mind, getting cold feet, moving the goalposts, changing their expectations, which one of the biggest challenges of running an M&A firm in general. We don't have any clause in our contract with a seller that forces them to sell. So if we say, David, your business is worth $10 million, we go out and we run a process and we get you $10 million cash offer. It's a perfect deal. It's a great buyer. Technically, you can still say no and say, no, I want $15 million, even though we didn't agree that upfront. The way our agreement works is you only pay us if you are happy to sell and go ahead and sell. So fortunately, that does not happen that often. And part of the reason I like being a primarily referral-based business is if people are referred to you, they're more likely to behave well. If they have no idea who you are and you have no mutual connections, then they're more likely to kind of mess around. But yeah, the most common reason for any deal falling through is always one of the parties changing their mind or moving the goalpost. I think a lot of people would assume it's like business has no interest, business gets no offers, business has a problem someone didn't notice. So probably if you were to survey people who try to buy a business on Flipper or Biz Buy Sell, the biggest reason for deals not going ahead would almost always be misrepresentation. The sellers misrepresented the business. That happens all the time. But we have a very comprehensive pre-listing due diligence process we follow, which is essentially a full financial audit and various other elements of due diligence. So while we can't technically guarantee it, and buyers still have to do their own due diligence, we are at least confident that we've done our due diligence, and we're taking one variable out of the equation, which is deal does not fall apart because seller has misrepresented something, because we've already picked up on it up front and either dropped them or changed expectations. So there is a little bit of a difference to that answer. If you ask me, our reason is buyers and sellers changing mind for various reasons in the process. Privately, it's always misrepresentation. I think if you are the way I always kind of think about it, if you are an honest person yourself, I think it's quite hard to believe how dishonest and untrustworthy a lot of people can be. I know I definitely learned the hard way getting into the industry, being 12 years ago, being quite naive, assuming people will pay you when they say they're going to pay you and all of that. But that's not really the reality.
Yeah. So let's get into that a little bit. So before that, I'm thinking about three different angles for this conversation. We can talk about your experience building FE International and how you ended up there, which you just referred to, and we can actually go into the transaction of the sell side and buy side. So starting with your experience, my research tells me that you had a stint in finance and supply chain, and you were also flipping websites yourself, where it sounds like you learned some things the hard way. So tell me about how you ended up building FE International.
Yeah, so when I was at college, I did a couple of I did a business degree. Part of my course was we had to do a couple of internships. So I did a couple of internships in different companies. One was an investment bank. One was in the supply chain space, which I guess is now very relevant to e-commerce. And then the investment banking is relevant to, I guess, investment banking, which is essentially what an M&A firm is. When I was at college, I started buying and selling to try and make extra money. I think like every college student out there who doesn't have rich parents paying for stuff, be trying to make some extra money, buying and selling domains. I was buying and selling websites. So I'm not technical at all. And I didn't have any money. So when I say a website, I'm talking about something I would buy for $100 and then I'd be reselling it for $500. So I did that throughout college, particularly in the last couple of years. I was doing that quite consistently. Wasn't making a huge amount of money. And then, just the long story short, is in 2010, the year I graduated, most of my peers were going to work for big investment banks or consulting firms or big four accounting firms. But economic conditions were not the best in 2010. It was not a very good year to graduate. So quite a few of those companies were rescinding offers or being flaky or trying to defer a year. So I figured, hey, why not go? Now's the time to kind of double down on the business I've got half working. Why not do this for a year, see if I can make it work? And if not, I'll just go get a job. So what I did in the year I graduated, so 2010, I wrote a book and various other supplementary materials. So there's like a forum of like coaching, mentorship, all that kind of stuff you could get off other like downloadable spreadsheets. I wrote a book about buying and selling websites and domains. So it's basically the concepts that I had followed to spot good opportunities, position it better, and resell it. And at the time, I was using marketplaces like Flipper and Biz Buy Sell myself to find buyers. It's only as I built FE International where we now don't rely on third-party marketplaces ourselves. We have our own network of buyers who work with us and trust us, and that we reach out to as part of a sale. So I read the book. It kind of took off at the time. It did really well, at least for 2010. Student me, it was a lot of money. I had no overhead. Just bring in more than enough to like pay my rent and things like that. Off the back of the book, I thought, oh, well, maybe the business will just be like selling courses for the rest of my life. But people back in 2010, if you wanted to sell your business, you could go to Biz Buy Sell and Flipper. But if you wanted to find a FE International for tech businesses, there was no one that really existed. There are a couple of firms out there, but no one, if you had a business below $100 million valuation, no one wanted to talk to you. You could find firms that would talk to you and pretend they know what they're doing, like traditional business brokers, but they didn't really know anything about e-commerce, SaaS, or content businesses. So when I wrote the book, some of the people who bought it were people who own businesses in the space and wanted to sell them. So what happened is people came to me and said, "Hey, Thomas, I've read your book. It's really great. I know you've got like community, you got some like coaching, but actually I just want someone to like sell my business for me."
Did you expect that when you wrote the book, or was that
I had no idea. I wouldn't say it was random, because I guess the idea was to create a central location, like a forum where people could talk about it. And then maybe I could identify opportunities of things I could monetize or launch. So I did not necessarily expect that, but I did expect it to be some like collaborative feedback. It wasn't supposed to be a buy the book and then disappear, never interact with me. It was supposed to be somewhat a funnel for a private community, I guess. So no, I didn't expect it. And then it's kind of funny looking back, and a lot of people wouldn't believe me because I spend time with a lot of early stage entrepreneurs who ask me questions, and almost everyone focuses on their website, their branding, their name, all that kind of stuff. For the first couple of years when we were doing M&A, we didn't even have a website. You kind of got my email address. It was like referral only. People would reach out and say, "Oh, my friend Jim told me you're the guy to speak to." The guy, yeah. And then, exactly. So that's how it built from there. And then in 2012, we pivoted. We decided to fully focus on M&A. That's where my current business partner, Ismail, joined. And he's still with the business today. And we said, all right, let's spend all of our time on M&A. Let's scrap some of the other things we were doing. So we were still buying sites ourselves. We were still doing courses. We were still doing coaching. We had loads of like random side stuff going on.
Yeah. How did you find your business partner, Ismail?
We went to college together. Yeah, we went to college together. So he graduated, went to work for an investment bank. I did not go to work for an investment bank. And essentially, I had figured out the industry experience side. So e-commerce, SaaS, content, that's always been my area. He figured out the banking side, and we kind of tried to build an investment banking level process and company for people with smaller businesses in an industry that didn't previously have any formal reputation. So that's really what we did. We kind of have quite different personalities, quite different philosophies on it. But if you combine the two, it creates, I like to think, quite good service over time.
Yeah. You mentioned something a little bit earlier in passing of, it's what starting a side hustle is what every college student does if they came from a family without much money. I can relate to that. I had a similar experience. So it sounds like you don't really come from a family of other entrepreneurs, but how did you end up? What do you think led you down this path of business if that wasn't really something that you saw in your family?
Honestly, I don't really remember. I don't have like an inspiring story of like, wow, this happened. And then suddenly I decided I was going to do it. I think really it was necessity of economic conditions at the time. There were not that many jobs. And I'd kind of already been, I think throughout, even when I was younger, I was always trying to find ways to make money doing something. And like, I guess maybe you could describe it like a lazy way, which was like, I would always work. So I'd always have like a job when I was a kid, but I kind of got bored of earning the equivalent of like $6 an hour when I was 16. So I was like, well, maybe there's a way to make more money than this, applying the same work ethic, but by not working for someone else. So I think maybe a bad experiences working for other people when I was younger kind of made me think about doing something for myself. And then, I mean, buying and selling things, I think like websites were just what I found, but there's loads of things you can buy and sell. I think almost everyone's starting a side hustle today. There's things you can buy cheaper than you can then resell them for. That's been around for literally tens of thousands of years. That's like the whole premise of business. So I don't really think there was any like tipping point for me. I think it was really just economic climate was not good. I had something that was working and I figured why not try it and make some money and see if I could turn it into a real business. But I didn't really know how big it could get. And I wasn't like, hey, I'm going to build this into $1 billion business. At the time, the industry didn't really exist. So it's a little bit different now, because if you look back now and say, a lot of people would say, oh, well, yeah, that's a really good idea. It really made sense to launch that business. You had such great like foresight. But the reality is, if we went back in time 12 years, you would never have invited me on your podcast, because you'd be like, what on earth are you doing? There's no demand for this, which was kind of true. There was no kind of M&A deal volume happening for businesses in the industry. So essentially we kind of had to create the demand from scratch. So the demand was there. It just wasn't very obvious until I wrote the book, and then started to get a lot of word of mouth very quickly.
Got it. And now, are you still buying and selling websites or companies yourself?
We do. So Ismail, we've been doing this pretty much since day one of the company. So it's not a core focus, and we keep it as a separate registered company as
Hmm.
well. But no, we always have. And I think part of our logic is, firstly, personally, we're fortunate that FE International has grown into quite a profitable business. So we often have capital to invest. And I don't really know, maybe this is a good or a bad thing. I don't really know about other industries. So I'm like, well, what am I going to do with my money? Do I invest in real estate? Do I invest in stocks? Like, yes, a little bit. But really it makes sense to invest back into the industry. And also, as an advisor, again, I think there's different philosophical views on this. I think it's very difficult to run an advisory business where you kind of essentially tell business owners what to do, whether they're buying or selling, if you haven't actually done it yourself. And I think I'd be a bit of a hypocrite running an industry leading M&A firm if I didn't at least invest some of my own cash into the industry as well. So we keep it separate. Yes, we still buy businesses, generally only one or two a year. Like we're not really doing many deals ourselves, but we generally, similar to FE, each year we buy a bigger and bigger business. So our average deal size personally has gone up. And then we have a team that runs that primarily report into kind of Ismail at the moment. That's like one of his areas of focus, but we will continue to do that because I think it's a good way to build a service because you can really kind of see the pain points in real time. And then also it's kind of an adult version of a side hustle as well. Like it's a nice extra income stream for us.
Yeah. And what sort of trends are you starting to see in the M&A space right now? What types of businesses are you seeing get swooped up?
So I think like trends in general, like change every year. You could ask me this question, there'd be like a new kind of hot business model. We tend to intentionally not chase trends. So if there is a trend, we're probably not on top of it because we generally like to see how it plays out before we put any kind of resource into learning that space. So I think businesses are always popular and have been. So maybe this isn't answering a question, but I'm intentionally not answering it. Businesses are always popular and always trendy, are growing revenue, profitable. And this is particularly important in weak economic cycles like we're going into now. It's not that people are going to stop buying businesses or anything like that, or multiples are going to go down. It's really just that good businesses will continue to sell and bad businesses, which are losing money that now can't get venture capital, are not going to sell. So being profitable is very important. I think over the last couple of years, essentially we've had like a bull market for probably nearly 10 years now. You probably could have got away with maybe not having a profitable business to sell to a big strategic buyer or venture funded firm or whatever that might be. But that's probably not going to be the case in the upcoming economic cycle. So since day one of the business, I've always believed that you should only buy a business that's profitable. So that's always what we focused on since day one. So for us, like we're not really affected by kind of macro trends because we've always just sold profitable businesses. So if there's a whole subset of businesses which are no longer profitable and can't get funding, they were never really our clients in the first place. They were never calling us. They were going elsewhere and trying to do something different. Businesses which are in the opposite of a trendy industry, so an evergreen industry, something that was relevant 10 years ago and something that will be relevant 10 years ahead as well. Obviously, you don't have a crystal ball, so you can't always tell what's going to be popular in future. But I think most of the time it's kind of obvious if something's going to be definitely still relevant in 10 years. Like almost every industry you would know about will still be around in 10 years and what's not going to be. So for example, one of the things we didn't really jump on was anything crypto related, which I think basically every firm in the industry, every person was jumping on the trend over the last few years. I think my position was I didn't really understand it. I didn't really know if I could figure out how to understand it. And it seemed in my mind to rely almost entirely on speculation. So did I believe that long term it'd be a really good investment? Businesses in the space. think my general personal position was I didn't know, but the answer is probably no. Therefore, it makes sense to just sit back and kind of stay out of the space. So lots of trends like that come along. I think a lot of people like, if we were interviewing me a year ago and this was a crypto podcast, people would say, "Oh, Thomas, you're an idiot. Like, of course, crypto is going to do really well. It's the future, etc., etc." Like, at least I'm sure there is a future for it. While I don't really understand it, I think being interviewed today, it looks like maybe our judgment was correct, but who knows in future. But I guess the point is, at a high level, we try and ignore trends because you don't know where they're going to end up, and we focus on, I guess, boring, profitable businesses, which people are always going to want to buy.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's jump into the sell side. I know that that's the side of the transaction that you're representing. So for the entrepreneurs that are building businesses now, especially going into what seems like a recession, what should they be keeping in mind when they're thinking about scaling out their business? And like, how do you build a business with an exit in mind?
So there's lots of ways to think about it. And the way I currently think about it, and this is definitely a thought that's changed over time. If you listen to a podcast that was on 5 years ago, I probably had a slightly different answer. But I think as I've got older, a little bit more life experience, spoken to more people, I think this is important. So I think the very first thing you need to do, fundamentally, firstly, you need to have a business that's making money. There's no point, you couldn't find me and all the other experts in the industry and get checklists and ideas of things you must be doing to sell your business. But ultimately, it has to be making money. That should be your number one priority as a business owner at any time. Nothing me or anyone else should tell you should change that plan. So number one has to be growing. Number two, I think your plan should entirely be dependent on what you're trying to achieve. So if you're trying to build $1 billion business, that's great. If you're trying to build $1 million business, that's also great. I can't tell you, you can't tell them. No one can tell you what kind of business you should be building or how big you want it to be. But that's the very first important thing to establish, because once you've established that, it really helps dictate what kind of advice you would get given. Because your $1 billion business is completely different to $1 million business. What your plan and like business trajectory strategy has to be is completely different in both cases. So I think before you go about building a business that is sellable, you establish like, what are you actually trying to achieve? Are you willing to work 80 hours a week for 10 years and create life-changing generational wealth, which is definitely possible if you're willing to do that. And this is not a conversation about like work ethic or anything like that, but I'm definitely a firm believer of the harder you work building a business, the more hours you work, that's generally going to be correlated to success. That doesn't mean you can't build a $10 million business working 20 hours a week. I just think it's far less likely than the person working 60. So figure out what you're trying to achieve. And that should, to an extent, be dictated by your work ethic and what you're willing to do. If you want to keep a full-time job and you want to build $1 million business, you want to work 5 hours a week on it, that's definitely possible. But it's probably unrealistic that you can work 5 hours a week while working a full-time job and build $100 million business. So establish what you're trying to do, and then that will really dictate, I guess, what my answer would be from there. But ultimately, in any business, you really need to focus on revenue growth. It's just the person with more time and resource will probably be able to grow faster than the person who is working full time, or maybe doesn't want to work as many hours, or has other like priorities in life. So that's why it's very much a personal decision. There's not a right or wrong answer. And I think if you spend too much time on social media, there's all sorts of polarizing approaches to work and work ethic and success. And I think you'd find people who are very strongly opinionated either way, like want to be flexible, want to work remotely, want to work whatever hours I want. People who want to work 100 hours a week in the office. My view is neither of them are right or wrong. You just have to decide what you want, and you have to then build a team around that. If you want to work 100 hours a week and you want to be in an office, that's great, but you probably shouldn't then be building out a remote team with flexible work and unlimited vacation time all those kind of things, because you're just not going to jibe on culture. People are going to quit, and you're not going to have very happy employees, and you're not going to be very happy yourself. So you have to decide for yourself what you want, and then kind of build your business plan and what you're doing, your strategy around what you're trying to achieve. And a big part of that is like what culture you want to create internally. And at least initially, say first 20 people you hire, culture is very much going to be driven by you, like your personality, your work ethic, your philosophy on life, political, economic, whatever views it will be. Like, you're most likely to attract people similar to you when you start out. As time goes on, that becomes a little bit different. Like we have multiple offices around the world. So what we have, I guess, a company culture. Each office also has their own culture. Like we have a team in New York, we have a team in Miami. If you go walk into both of those offices, yes, it's still the same company, but they all have slightly different approaches to work and things like that.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, the most basic advice for anyone trying to build a business to sell is make sure you're profitable. That's it. Doesn't matter how much PR you're getting or venture capital you're raising, especially in this current environment. If you're not making money, you're not going to be able to sell.
Pretty much, I'd say. And that'll be the case if you listen to this podcast in like 2042, in 20 years' time, or if we did this 20 years ago in 2002, that advice has always been the case. That does not mean that other types of businesses cannot be sellable, but I would be willing to bet, well, I essentially have bet my entire life on the fact that there will forever be demand for growing profitable businesses. There will always be buyers out there, regardless of the economic climate or situation you're in. There will always be an acquirer for that kind of business willing to pay a premium. So that as a business owner should be your, assuming you want to sell at least, should be your number one focus.
Yeah. And just now you were referencing, it's a personal decision, what kind of business you want to run, what kind of culture you want to build. What sort of culture or type of business are you trying to build at FE International? And maybe we'd love to hear an example of a tough decision you might have had to make to build the company.
Yeah. So I think one thing, so I mentioned earlier, Ismail and I, my business partner, we have quite different personalities, but we do align on quite a few things. One of those is like general values and work ethic. So both of us work hard, maybe more than we should. And we also want a team that do that as well. Well, we do have some remote team. The vast majority of our team are in an office, and that has really been what we've done since day one. Again, I think you can have very polarizing views of in office, not in office. Again, my view is it doesn't really matter as long as you're clear with your team what you want them to do. You're like, don't hire a team, tell them it's a remote job, and then 6 weeks later say, okay, everyone needs to go to the office. And also the other way around, I think a lot of people don't really realize this, particularly if you hang around in like tech circles. There are a lot of people that want to be in the office. So if you say, okay, everyone's in the office, and you say, sorry guys, we're closing down the office, everyone has to work from home. There's actually a lot of people out there who don't want that, and they will quit and go find a job that is in the office. So we've always built our culture around that. I think now as the company's developed, like across our business, we're well over like 130 people now. So culture is not driven by myself and Ismail. Like I said, if you walk into any of our individual offices, each of them kind of operate in their own slightly nuanced way. The team will slightly different personalities, but still like the fundamental, like what we're trying to build, everyone is aligned on the vision and values, core values that we have there. I say probably like the tough things that happen over time. There's not necessarily one particular moment, but as you're building a business, firstly, your goals can change. So you might say, I want to build a business to X size, and then you might get to level X, whatever it is. And then you might say, actually, which is kind of what happened to me. You might say, actually, I'm still like full of energy. I want to get to the next level, but I didn't realize that next level existed until I got here. Or you might say, I want to get here, and you might only get halfway and say, you know what, this is good enough. I'm going to sell now and then go do something else. Maybe I'm more passionate about, maybe I want to break, spend time with family, whatever it might be. So firstly, your goals can change. I think particularly as you're building a small team, this isn't really the case for us now, over 130 people. But when like the first 20 you hire, chances are the people you need to get you from like 0 to 1, or maybe that's 0 to 1 million, 0 to 10 million, they're probably not the right people to get you from 10 million to 100 million or 10 million to 50 million. So I think the tough thing is kind of being honest with yourself and your team, like what you need at each of the different stages of your business. And it's not necessarily a bad thing if people are no longer a fit. I think the bad thing is if you don't tell them that and you like kind of aren't happy to like let people go. They've had to let people go over time, not necessarily because they were bad at their job, but because the job they were doing was just not what we needed anymore for the direction we were going. And I think as a business owner or like CEO, founder, whatever you're going to be, almost if you speak to every founder, almost all the difficult things they've had to do are people related. I don't think that's any different for me.
Yeah, that's what I'm running into. The marketing and the services side of an agency that I'm running, easy stuff. Working with clients, pretty straightforward, but figuring out how to coach and develop employees and make sure the business is evolving. What we hired you for 6 months ago is not the role that we need you to be in now. So that's been a huge learning experience.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So coming up on time here. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions to close, and we'll wrap it up from there. So
sure.
What's one opinion you have about business that you believe people would disagree with?
I don't know if people disagree with this. I think most people would agree, but I think most people don't do this. Or at least my maybe like semi-skeptical experience is that I think like doing the right thing is always the right thing. And what that means is that like sometimes you have to make decisions which are right for the client, but not necessarily right for you. So that might be, I don't know, a really cool business that comes along to us and I would love to represent and sell it, but actually like we're not the right fit. Maybe they have like different expectations. Maybe they want us to change our process. Or to point about team, maybe there's someone in your team who you don't think you can progress any further in their career. So it actually makes sense to let them go. At the time, they'll probably hate you and say, Thomas is terrible. Like, let's leave him a bad review. He sucks. But in future, they'll realize that was like actually the right thing. So I think that's one of my philosophies is like doing the right thing is always the right thing, even if at the time it doesn't feel like to you or the other person it necessarily is.
It's not going to be pleasant. Yeah.
To my point about reputation, that compounds over time. If you are always willing to make selfless decisions for the benefit of your clients, over time, they will not necessarily realize it straight away, but over time, people will start to talk about you and say, okay, well, cool. We have a very good reputation and people will come to us because they know we'll give them very direct, straight advice. We don't bullshit people to get them to sign an engagement agreement with us. And that's a reputation we've built. So I think over time that pays off.
That is helpful to hear. Sometimes I feel a little bit silly when I'm on a sales call and I just tell them, hey, I know you're willing to pay us, but we're not going to be a good fit. And I don't feel right taking you on. So good encouragement that's the right call. All right. So what is not the most, but one impactful piece of advice you've been given?
So I think probably the most important advice I was given like quite early on was you need to focus. I think a lot of entrepreneurs have personality traits. In my case, like ADHD, I think have personality traits which are kind of create tendencies of like getting distracted and wanting to do lots of other things. This is Ismail to me in 2012 was, hey, why are we selling books when books make 1% of your revenue, but take 90% of your time? Why are we not doing M&A, which is 99% of your revenue? And you barely even like reply to emails from clients about it. That's really it. It's like, figure out what you want to focus on. That does not necessarily mean that the things you're no longer focusing on are bad or wouldn't be profitable or are not things you should be doing. It's just, I think if you want to build a successful business, I don't know if there's like a dollar amount, but almost any business can get to a substantial size where you probably your family never have to work again, just doing one thing really well for us, it's sell side M&A. We're choosing to launch more services and offer more. But if I really wanted, I mean, we already have an 8-figure business. If I wanted to keep growing it beyond that, just doing one thing, we really could. So I think focusing is really important. I think particularly for a lot of young entrepreneurs, we see a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm people who are like, oh, I'm CEO of 7 businesses, age 23. Like, yeah, that seems cool. And it might be a great badge of honor. And yeah, maybe you can do it for a while, but you won't properly be focused. You should figure out which one you should be doing, hire a CEO for the others or sell them.
Yeah, great advice. So last question here. Where can people find you on the internet?
So we're talking about being distracted on social media, generally quite active on either Twitter or LinkedIn. If you just want to learn more about like FE International and what we do, you can go to our website, which is feinternational.com. We have lots of different resources there, regardless of what you like. If you want to find podcasts like this I've been on in the past, and like maybe you're you like listening to things to learn, maybe you want to read, like we have a comprehensive blog. Maybe you want to call someone in the team, you can phone one of our offices, you can visit one of our offices. But yeah, go on our website, navigate around, whether you're a buyer or seller. If you own a business and want a free valuation, we offer those to everyone. So it's always worth reaching out, regardless where you are. So you might say, hey, my business is, I think, worth $1 million. I'm trying to build it to 20 million, but can you talk to me about how to get there? That's definitely something we can do.
Awesome. I might even take you up on that. Thomas, really appreciate the time. Enjoyed the conversation. Take care.
Cool. Thanks, David.